September 1975, Decatur, Illinois. A field at the edge of the Farm Progress Showgrounds, where the corn stubble had been cut short to make room for something no one had seen before. It was not a tractor. It was not a combine. It was not a corn picker, a forage harvester, a mower conditioner, or a manure spreader. It was all of them. One machine, one engine, 4 seasons of work, on a single chassis, built by a company from Coldwater, Ohio, that the major implement dealers had already stopped worrying about. Within 18 months, the waiting list was 11 months long. Within 8 years, the line was dead. The engineers who designed it watched their drawings surface in European patent filings under different names. The farmers who swore by it kept running it long after the company that built it had been sold, resold, and rationalized into something unrecognizable. But the real story of New Idea is not the machine that arrived too soon or too late or at exactly the wrong moment in American agricultural history. It is the story of what happens when American engineering builds something genuinely radical, and the holding company that owns it has never once walked a muddy field in October. Every week, we tell the stories of American machine companies that built something precise and lasting, and what the market did to them. Like the video and subscribe if that history matters to you. This story begins not in a boardroom. It begins in Coldwater, Ohio, in 1899. Coldwater, Ohio sits in Mercer County, 40 miles south of the Indiana line, in the flat, dark-soiled farming country that runs west from the Miami River Valley toward the Illinois border. In 1899, it was a market town surrounded by grain farms and hog operations, the kind of place where a farm implement dealer knew every customer by name and knew, better than any engineer in a city office, exactly what was breaking down in the field every spring. Joseph Oppenheim was that kind of dealer. He had spent years selling farm equipment to Mercer County farmers, and year after year, he watched the same thing happen. April mud, manure to spread before planting, and a machine that could not handle both conditions at once. The horse-drawn broadcast spreader of 1899 was driven by a chain connected to a separate power source, unreliable in wet ground, prone to clogging when the load was heavy, and ruinously slow when a farmer had 400 acres to fertilize before the soil warmed enough to plant. The work that should have taken 4 days took 8. The planting window closed, the yield suffered, and every spring the same farmers came back to Oppenheim's lot with the same complaint. He did not hire a consultant. He did not commission a study. He built a machine. The New Idea manure spreader, introduced in 1899, was the first commercially practical ground-driven spreader in American agricultural history. Ground-driven means exactly what it sounds like. The power to run the spreading mechanism came not from a separate chain drive or a horse-mounted power takeoff, but from the rotation of the spreader's own wheels as it moved across the field. No separate power source, no chain to jam in mud. The faster the horses walked, the faster the beaters turned. The mechanism was elegant in the way that only solutions to real problems can be elegant, not because an engineer imagined it, but because a dealer in Coldwater, Ohio, had watched the problem fail to solve itself for long enough. The first New Idea spreader, listed at approximately $45 in 1899, roughly $1,600 in today's money. For a Mercer County farmer earning perhaps $300 in a good crop year, that was a serious purchase. But the machine paid for itself in the first season for any operation over 100 acres, and word moved fast through the Ohio implement dealer network. By 1903, New Idea spreaders were appearing in Prairie Farmer and American Agriculturalist, the 2 publications that a Midwest farm family read cover to cover through the winter months. The Ohio State University Agricultural Extension Service began recommending the ground-driven design in its county demonstration programs. Implement dealers in Indiana, Illinois, and Michigan began stocking the line. The Coldwater factory, which had started in a building modest enough that the first employees could hear each other talk across the floor, began to expand. The channel that carried New Idea to the national market was not a government contract or a trade show. It was the American Implement Dealer Network, the independent farm equipment retailers in every county seat town, from Ohio to Kansas. Men who sold on reputation because their customers would be back in the spring regardless of whether the machine had worked. When a New Idea spreader performed in a Tippecanoe County field in April, the dealer in Lafayette heard about it by June. The line spread the way reliable equipment always spreads in farm country, one satisfied operator telling another at the grain elevator on a Tuesday morning. By the time the First World War ended and American agriculture entered its first great mechanization wave, New Idea had expanded its cold water plant to a workforce that would eventually approach 1,400 at its peak. The product line had grown beyond spreaders to include corn pickers, machines that stripped ears from standing stalks, and forage harvesters that chopped green corn and hay into the silage that fed Midwest dairy and beef operations through the winter. Each product followed the same design logic as the original spreader. Solve the problem the farmer actually has, in the field conditions the farmer actually works in, at a price a family operation can justify without a second mortgage. That logic built a company. It also built a culture, patient, practical, grounded in Mercer County clay. The implement dealer network that first distributed the New Idea spreader across the Ohio Valley would, 70 years later, be the same network that corporate consolidation dismantled, one dealership at a time. But that comes later. In the spring of 1899, in Coldwater, Ohio, the only thing that mattered was that the spreader worked, and it did. By the early 1970s, New Idea had spent 7 decades building a reputation on single-function equipment done exceptionally well. The Coldwater corn picker was a standard on Ohio and Indiana farms. The forage harvester line was specified by dairy operations across the upper Midwest. The manure spreader that had started everything was still the most copied design in the American implement market. But single-function equipment had a problem that no amount of refinement could solve. A Midwest corn and hay operation in 1973 needed, at minimum, a corn picker for October harvest, a forage harvester for summer silage, a mower conditioner to cut and crimp hay for field drying, and a spreader to return nutrients to the soil before spring planting. 4 machines. 4 engines to maintain. 4 separate parts inventories. 4 sets of dealer relationships for service calls, and 4 purchase prices that, added together, represented more capital than most family farm balance sheets could absorb in a single equipment cycle. The Coldwater engineering team had been watching this problem for years. The solution they arrived at was not incremental, it was structural. 1 power unit, 1 engine, 1 chassis. 4 interchangeable working heads, each one locking onto the same standardized receiver interface at the front of the machine, each one driven by the same power takeoff system, each one removable and replaceable in under 2 hours with standard hand tools. They called it the UniSystem. The UniSystem power unit that debuted at the Farm Progress Show in Decatur, Illinois in September 1975 was unlike anything the American implement market had seen at that price point. It was lower to the ground than a tractor, purpose-built for harvest work rather than general field operations, with a 96 horsepower diesel engine mounted behind the operator's cab, and a receiver hitch at the front that accepted each of the 4 working heads through a mechanical interface machined to tolerances that New Idea's Coldwater toolroom had spent 3 years refining. The receiver interface, the mechanical coupling that locked each working head to the power unit, was the engineering heart of the machine. It had to transfer full engine torque to 4 different implement designs, aligned perfectly under field conditions where mud and crop debris would coat every surface, and release cleanly when an operator needed to swap heads before the morning dew burned off. The Coldwater team machined it to a fit tolerance, tight enough that the connection felt solid under full harvest load, and loose enough that a single operator could complete the swap without mechanical assistance. The corn picker head stripped ears from standing stalks at field speed, the same function New Idea had been refining since the 1930s, now mounted on a self-propelled chassis that eliminated the tractor and the hitching time. The forage harvester head chopped green corn or standing hay into the silage lengths that dairy operators specified, typically 3/8 to 3/4 of an inch, for fermentation quality. The mower conditioner head cut hay and crimped the stems to accelerate field drying, reducing the time between cutting and baling by as much as a full day in humid Midwest summer conditions. And the manure spreader body, ground-driven, self-cleaning, descended in a direct engineering line from the machine Joseph Oppenheim had built in 1899, closed the seasonal loop. 4 functions, 1 machine, 1 engine to fuel, 1 oil to change, 1 filter to stock, 1 dealer to call when something broke. The base UniSystem power unit listed at approximately $14,000 in 1975, roughly $80,000 in today's money. That was a serious number, but the calculation a Midwest farmer ran against it was not $14,000 versus 0. It was $14,000 versus the combined cost of 4 separate machines performing the same functions, a cost that, priced through the implement dealer network in 1975, ran between $22,000 and $26,000 for equivalent capacity. The UniSystem cost 1 year's net farm income for a median Iowa operation in 1975. 4 conventional machines cost nearly 2. The economics were not subtle. A Mercer County farmer in 1975 earned approximately $12,000 to $14,000 in net farm income in a good crop year. He understood immediately what the UniSystem's price meant in real terms. He also understood what 4 separate maintenance schedules meant in real terms, because he had been running them. The distribution breakthrough came not from a government contract or a defense procurement. It came from the Farm Progress Show itself, the largest outdoor agricultural equipment demonstration in America, held on working farmland outside Decatur so that machines could be evaluated doing actual field work, not standing on a convention floor. When the UniSystem ran its corn picker head through a demonstration plot in September 1975, the farmers watching were not watching a prototype. They were watching a production machine perform at field speed, on field terrain, in field conditions. Farm Journal and Successful Farming both featured the UniSystem in their fall 1975 equipment coverage. The Purdue University Agricultural Engineering Department initiated field efficiency studies. The Iowa Corn Growers Association included the machine in its equipment demonstration program for the 1976 season. Within 18 months of the Decatur debut, New Idea's order backlog for the UniSystem had reached 11 months. The Coldwater plant had not anticipated demand at that level. The factory tooling that produced the receiver interface components, the precision-machined heart of the entire system, had been sized for a market that turned out to be significantly larger than the engineering team's most optimistic projection. The waiting list was the clearest signal the American implement market could send. Farmers do not wait 11 months for equipment they are not certain about. They wait 11 months for equipment they have already decided they cannot operate without. The nameplate on the power unit housing was not a city of origin. It was a system standard. What no competitor could replicate in 1975 was the integration. Not any single component, but the fact that all 4 working heads had been designed simultaneously by the same Coldwater engineering team around the same receiver interface to the same power transfer specifications. A competitor could build a corn picker. A competitor could build a forage harvester. Building 4 implements that swapped onto a single chassis in under 2 hours with no loss of function in any configuration required the kind of accumulated engineering depth that New Idea had been building in Coldwater since 1899. John Deere had a larger dealer network. Case had deeper pockets. International Harvester had more engineers. None of them had a UniSystem. The fall of 1976 was the best moment in American agricultural history to sell a $14,000 piece of farm equipment. Net farm income across the Corn Belt had reached levels not seen since the post-war years. Corn was trading at $2.20 a bushel. Soybean prices were holding above $6. Iowa farmland that had sold for $400 an acre in 1970 was approaching $1,200. The farmers who had survived the lean years of the late 1960s had spent a decade watching their balance sheets strengthen, and by 1976 they were ready to invest in equipment that would let one operator do what 2 or 3 had done before. The UniSystem was engineered for exactly that farmer, in exactly that moment. The Ohio Farm Bureau Federation evaluated the machine in the spring of 1976 and recommended it to member operations across the state. The Illinois Agricultural Association followed with a bulk purchasing program that made the UniSystem available to member farms at a negotiated price. The first time a statewide farm organization had structured a group purchase around a New Idea product. The Iowa State University Extension Service ran demonstration sessions at 4 locations across the Corn Belt that summer, each one drawing more farmers than the extension agents had planned for. In Indiana, Tippecanoe County and Benton County farm operations began running UniSystem units through the full seasonal cycle, corn picker head in October, manure spreader body through the winter months, mower conditioner head for first cut hay in May, forage harvester head for silage corn in August. The machine did not sit idle between seasons. It worked every month of the farm year. The American Farm Bureau Federation featured the UniSystem in its National Equipment Showcase in 1977. The USDA Cooperative Extension Demonstration Farm Network, operating across 6 Midwest states, included new Idea Uni-System evaluations in its Equipment Efficiency Research Program. The Purdue University Agricultural Engineering Department published field efficiency data comparing the UniSystem's seasonal cost per acre against conventional 4-machine configurations. The numbers confirmed what the Benton County and Tippecanoe County operators had already worked out on the back of a fuel receipt. One machine, properly maintained and operated through all 4 seasonal configurations, could match the output of a conventional 4-machine setup at a total seasonal operating cost, fuel, maintenance, parts, labor, that was between 22 and 31% lower, depending on operation size and field conditions. The Purdue data was not marketing copy. It was field-verified agricultural engineering research, published in extension bulletins that county agents handed to farmers across Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois. By the end of the 1977 crop year, New Idea's implement dealer network, approximately 800 to 1,000 dealers nationwide at the brand's peak, was carrying the UniSystem as its flagship product. Dealers in Iowa and Illinois who had built their businesses on the New Idea spreader and corn picker lines were now selling UniSystem power units with waiting lists attached. The implement dealer in Champaign County in Illinois, who moved the most UniSystem units in the state in 1977, told Farm Journal that he had customers driving 3 counties to get on his list. He had never had a waiting list for any piece of equipment in 20 years in the business. The Coldwater plant at peak UniSystem production employed approximately 1,400 workers. The assembly line ran power units alongside the legacy spreader and forage harvester lines that had kept the factory running through the lean years of the early 1970s. The plant floor in the autumn of 1977 carried the specific smell of an Ohio implement factory running at capacity, cast iron from the foundry work, implement green enamel baking under the paint line heat lamps, cutting oil from the machining cells where the receiver interface components were being produced to the tolerances the engineering team had specified. The setup men who walked the UniSystem assembly line checked the receiver interface alignment on every unit before it cleared final inspection. The specification called for a fit tolerance that allowed clean engagement under field conditions, but transferred full torque without mechanical play. Holding that tolerance in production, not in the tool room, not on a prototype, but on a production line running multiple units per shift, required the kind of factory discipline that New Idea's Coldwater workforce had been accumulating for 7 decades. The plant engineer who signed the tooling purchase orders for the receiver interface, machining expansion in the autumn of 1974, was authorizing capital investment in the expectation that UniSystem demand would continue to grow. The backlog justified it. The farm income data justified it. The extension research justified it. What none of those numbers could account for was what was already moving toward the American Corn Belt from the direction of Washington, D.C., and the Federal Reserve, and the commodity markets in Chicago. But in October 1977, none of that had arrived yet. In October 1970, a farm operation in Benton County, Illinois, was running a UniSystem power unit with its corn picker head locked, moving through 480 acres of standing corn from first light to last. 1 machine, 1 operator, 1 fuel bill for the entire harvest. The neighboring operation ran 3 separate machines: a self-propelled corn picker, a tractor-mounted forage harvester, and a utility tractor for field logistics. 3 operators, 3 maintenance schedules, 3 fuel tanks to fill before dawn. The Benton County operation finished its 480 acres 4 days ahead of its neighbor. 4 days in October in the Corn Belt is not a scheduling advantage. 4 days in October is the difference between corn delivered to the elevator at harvest month basis price and corn delivered when the price has moved against you. The UniSystem did not just harvest corn, it harvested time. Farm Journal's field correspondent filed a report on the Benton County comparison that winter. It became the most reprinted equipment article in the publication's 1977 to 1978 editorial cycle. The USDA Economic Research Service cited the UniSystem's seasonal efficiency performance in its 1978 report on farm equipment consolidation trends. New Idea had built the right machine. It had built it at the right price. It had put it in front of the right buyers at the right moment. The cold water factory was running at capacity. The dealer network was carrying 11-month backlogs. The extension research was confirming every claim the engineering team had made. Everything was in place. What made the UniSystem's peak years something more than a commercial success story was the particular moment in American farm life it had landed in. The farmers buying UniSystem units in 1976 and 1977 were not buying equipment. They were buying a philosophy, the conviction that one well-engineered machine, built by people who understood what a Midwest farm actually required, was worth more than 4 adequate machines built by people who did not. That conviction had been the foundation of New Idea's cold water identity since 1899. The UniSystem was simply the most complete expression of it the company had ever achieved. The operator running a UniSystem through the Corn Belt seasons of 1977 understood something that the holding company executives who would eventually own New Idea never fully grasped. The machine's value was not in any single configuration. It was in the relationship between configurations, in the fact that the same chassis that harvested corn in October was spreading manure in February, conditioning hay in May, and filling silos in August. The operator learned one machine deeply, across all 4 seasons, the way a machinist learns a lathe, by sound, by feel, by what the engine note tells you when the load changes in a heavy-yield row. That depth of operator knowledge was itself a form of efficiency that no field trial could fully quantify. A farmer who had run a UniSystem through 3 complete seasonal cycles knew, without consulting a manual, exactly how the corn picker head behaved in down corn after a wind event, exactly how much hydraulic pressure the forage harvester head required in heavy green corn, exactly how the mower conditioner's crimping rolls needed to be set for first-cut alfalfa versus third-cut mixed grass. The machine trained the operator. The operator made the machine more productive than any efficiency study could measure. This was the American industrial cultural moment that the UniSystem occupied. Not a defense contract, not a government procurement, but something older and more specific to the American farm. The convergence of a genuine engineering solution with the particular kind of farmer who could recognize it, afford it, and use it to its full potential. That farmer existed in significant numbers across the Corn Belt in 1976 and 1977. He would not exist in the same numbers for long. The peak production metrics for the UniSystem period tell the story in the language of the factory floor. At its height, the cold water plant was producing an estimated 1,500 to 2,000 UniSystem units per year. Industry estimates, because New Idea's private ownership structure under AVCO Corporation did not require the public reporting that would have produced confirmed production figures. The 1,400 workers in the cold water plant were running the UniSystem line alongside the legacy product lines that had sustained the company through the early 1970s. The implement dealer network at its widest reach covered every Corn Belt state and extended into the dairy farming regions of Wisconsin, Minnesota, and upstate New York, where the forage harvester head found a secondary market in hay and silage operations. In 4 seasons of peak production, New Idea's UniSystem replaced an estimated 4,000 to 6,000 separate single-function machines in American Midwest farm operations. 4,000 machines that did not need to be fueled individually, maintained individually, or replaced individually. 4,000 engines that did not need oil changes. 4,000 sets of drive chains that did not need tensioning. 4,000 dealer service calls that did not need to be scheduled across 4 different product lines from 4 different manufacturers. The cold water engineering team had not just built a machine, they had built a system. And systems, when they work as designed, create a loyalty that single products rarely generate. A farmer who had organized his entire seasonal operation around the UniSystem's 4 configuration cycle was not a customer who would switch manufacturers casually. The attachment heads represented a capital investment tied specifically to the New Idea power unit. The operator knowledge was specific to the New Idea receiver interface. The parts inventory in the farm shop was specific to the cold water engineering specifications. New Idea had built, in the language of industrial economics, a switching cost. The farmer who bought a UniSystem in 1976 was not just buying a machine. He was entering a system that would, if New Idea held its engineering commitments, reward his loyalty with continuous improvement. a second-generation power unit with more horsepower, new attachment heads for emerging crop types, refined receiver interface tolerances that extended the machine's productive life. That was the implicit contract between Coldwater and its customers. The implement dealer in Champaign County, Illinois, who had sold more UniSystem units than any dealer in the state in 1977, understood that contract. His customers understood it. The Ohio State and Purdue Extension agents who had documented the machine's field performance understood it. The executives at AVCO Corporation, the aerospace and defense conglomerate that had acquired New Idea in 1965, understood something different. They understood quarterly returns, asset valuations, and the carrying cost of a farm implement division, in a period when the American agricultural equipment market was beginning to show the first signs of the pressure that would, within a decade, become a crisis. In Coldwater, the factory ran at capacity. The dealer network carried its backlogs. The engineering team began preliminary design work on what a second-generation UniSystem power unit might look like. More horsepower, refined hydraulics, and expanded attachment head family. The drawings were never finished. The first sign was not a plant closure or a product cancellation. It was quieter than that. In 1965, AVCO Corporation, a Connecticut-based aerospace and defense conglomerate whose primary businesses were aircraft engines, financial services, and defense electronics, acquired New Idea Farm Equipment Company. The acquisition price was not disclosed publicly. What was disclosed in the years that followed was the management philosophy that AVCO brought to Coldwater, a conglomerate's logic applied to a farm implement engineering culture that had never operated on conglomerate time. AVCO understood quarterly earnings cycles. It understood defense contract performance metrics and aerospace manufacturing tolerances. What it did not understand, what no aerospace holding company has ever fully understood about agricultural equipment, was the seasonal rhythm of the American farm implement market. Equipment is not purchased in a straight line. It is purchased when crop prices support the capital commitment, when the harvest has been good enough to justify the debt, when the farmer's banker agrees that the balance sheet can carry another $14,000. That decision cycle runs on crop years, not fiscal quarters. Through the late 1960s and into the early 1970s, the tension between AVCO's management expectations and Coldwater's engineering culture was managed by the farm economy itself. Commodity prices were rising, farm income was growing. The UniSystem, still in development, represented exactly the kind of high-value product that could justify continued investment in the Coldwater engineering team. Then two things happened simultaneously, and neither of them was recoverable. The first was macroeconomic. In 1979, Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker raised interest rates to levels not seen in the post-war American economy, prime rate reaching 21% by June 1981, in a deliberate effort to break the inflation that had been running through the American economy since the oil shocks of 1973. The policy worked. It also broke the American farm economy in the process. Farmers who had borrowed at 7% to buy land at $1,200 an acre in 1977 were now servicing that debt at interest rates that tripled their carrying costs. Land values collapsed. In Iowa, farmland that had peaked at $2,000 an acre in 1980 fell to $800 by 1986. Net farm income across the Corn Belt dropped from its 1973 to 1974 peak levels by more than 60% over the same period. The farmer who had been the UniSystem's ideal buyer, cash positive, growth-oriented, willing to invest $14,000 in a seasonal efficiency system, stopped buying capital equipment. He stopped because his bank told him to stop. In many cases, he stopped because his bank was calling the loans he already had. The second was corporate. In 1976, the same year the UniSystem reached its widest initial distribution, AVCO sold New Idea to Allied Products Corporation, a Michigan-based holding company that was assembling a portfolio of agricultural equipment brands. Allied Products also owned White Farm Equipment, the brand that had absorbed Oliver, Cockshut, and Minneapolis Moline through the consolidation wave of the 1960s. The strategy was rational on paper: combine multiple implement brands under a single corporate structure, rationalize the dealer networks, achieve manufacturing economies of scale. The execution was something else. White Farm equipment carried debt loads that Allied Products had acquired along with the brand names. The dealer network that White Farm had assembled from 3 different legacy brands. Oliver Dealers, Minneapolis Moline Dealers, White Dealers, all now selling from the same lot under varying degrees of enthusiasm, was never fully integrated. When commodity prices collapsed and farm equipment sales fell across the board in the early 1980s, the White Farm dealer network did not contract in an orderly fashion. It fractured, and New Idea's distribution was tied to it. The implement dealer in Champaign County, Illinois, who had sold more UniSystem units than any dealer in the state in 1977, was, by 1983, operating under White Farm equipment branding on part of his lot. His parts orders were going through a corporate distribution system that prioritized White Farm tractor components over New Idea implement parts. His customers were calling about UniSystem service and reaching a parts desk that was not always certain which division handled the inquiry. The Coldwater engineering team had begun preliminary work on a second-generation UniSystem in the late 1970s, a higher horsepower power unit, refined hydraulics, an expanded attachment head family that would have included a grain head for small farm combine work. The drawings that existed in 1980 represented 3 years of engineering development. Allied Products did not authorize the capital investment to complete them. The decision was not announced. There was no press release, no industry statement, no acknowledgement in the farm press that the second-generation UniSystem had been canceled. The engineering team simply received no budget authorization for the 1981 development cycle. The project did not end. It stopped. John Deere's response to the UniSystem's market success was not a modular power unit. It was something more straightforward and more devastating. A larger dealer network, faster parts availability, and a self-propelled forage harvester, the 3960, introduced in the early 1980s, that addressed the same harvest efficiency problem the UniSystem had identified, through a single-function machine backed by Deere's national service infrastructure. A farmer who needed a forage harvester in 1982 could buy a Deere 3960 and have a parts dealer within 30 miles in every Corn Belt county. He could buy a New Idea UniSystem forage head and have a parts dealer who might or might not have the receiver interface components in stock, depending on what Allied Products distribution center had shipped that month. The choice was not a referendum on engineering quality. It was a referendum on confidence. Confidence that the machine would be supported, that the parts would be available, that the company behind the nameplate would still be there when the head needed rebuilding after 3 seasons in heavy corn. That confidence was eroding, not because the Coldwater engineers had failed, because the corporate structure above them had stopped investing in the conditions that confidence requires. By 1982, the UniSystem was no longer the machine that dealers led with. Farm Journal stopped featuring the UniSystem in its annual equipment buyer's guides after the 1982 edition. The omission was not editorial, it was economic. The publication covered what dealers were actively selling and what farmers were actively buying. By 1982, both of those categories had shifted. The farm crisis that the interest rate environment had been building since 1979 had arrived in full force across the Corn Belt, and the implement dealer lots that had carried 11-month UniSystem backlogs in 1977 were now carrying aged inventory and deferred service orders. The Gell Company of West Bend, Wisconsin had entered the forage harvester segment at a price point below the UniSystem's attachment head cost. A single-function machine, conventionally built without the modular architecture that made the UniSystem's engineering distinctive, but also made its price difficult to justify when a farm operations capital budget had been cut to essential maintenance only. Gell was not building a better machine. It was building a cheaper one, at a moment when cheaper was the only specification that mattered to a farmer carrying debt at 18% interest. Case IH's self-propelled combine line, the 1460 and 1480 series introduced in the early 1980s, addressed the large acreage harvest efficiency market from a different direction entirely. The self-propelled combine did not require seasonal head changes. It did not require a dedicated power unit. It was a single-purpose machine optimized for grain harvest at a scale that the UniSystem's corn picker configuration could not match on operations above 600 acres. As Corn Belt farm operations consolidated, larger operators absorbing the acreage of neighbors who could not service their debt, the average farm size that determined equipment purchasing decisions moved above the UniSystem's optimal operating range. The machine had been designed for the family farm of 1975. The family farm of 1983 was a different entity, or it was gone. UniSystem production at the Coldwater plant scaled back through 1981 and 1982. The precise production figures for those years are not fully documented in public records, but the implement dealer network's behavior tells the story clearly enough. Dealers who had maintained UniSystem demonstration units on their lots through the late 1970s began returning demonstration inventory to the factory. The practice of maintaining a working UniSystem for customer field demonstrations, standard procedure for any serious new idea dealer through 1979, became economically unjustifiable when the machine was moving slowly, and the demonstration unit represented capital that the dealership needed elsewhere. The Coldwater engineering workforce that had numbered approximately 1,400 at the UniSystem's peak contracted through the early 1980s as Allied Products rationalized its manufacturing operations across the White Farm and New Idea divisions. The engineers who had designed the UniSystem receiver interface, the precision-machined coupling that was the mechanical heart of the entire system, either retired, transferred to other Allied Products facilities, or moved to engineering positions at John Deere and CNH predecessor companies. At least one documented transfer placed a former New Idea implement engineer in a European agricultural equipment development role, where the modular harvesting concepts the Coldwater team had pioneered found a more receptive corporate environment. The drawings for the second-generation UniSystem were filed, not destroyed, filed. In April 1986, White Farm Equipment filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The filing was the result of accumulated debt, collapsed farm equipment sales, and the structural impossibility of servicing the obligations that Allied Products had taken on when it assembled its agricultural equipment portfolio at the peak of the farm economy. White Farm's Chapter 11 did not directly close the Coldwater plant, but it destroyed the dealer network that New Idea depended on for distribution. When White Farm's dealer agreements went into bankruptcy proceedings, the implement dealers who had been carrying both White Farm tractor lines and New Idea implement lines faced an immediate decision about which manufacturer relationships to maintain through the reorganization. Dealers with strong New Idea customer bases held on. Dealers whose primary business had been White Farm tractors and who carried New Idea as a secondary line made the calculation that a secondary implement line from a division of a bankrupt holding company was not a relationship worth protecting. 200 New Idea dealers closed or dropped the line in the 12 months following the White Farm bankruptcy filing. The distribution network that had taken 70 years to build contracted in 1 year. AGCO Corporation, then in the early stages of assembling the agricultural equipment portfolio that would eventually make it one of the largest implement manufacturers in the world, acquired the New Idea brand and the Coldwater operations in 1991. The acquisition preserved the factory. It preserved the spreader and tillage equipment lines that had sustained Coldwater since 1899. It preserved the name. It did not preserve the UniSystem. The Coldwater plant kept running, smaller. The UniSystem line had already been discontinued. The receiver interface tooling was in storage. The attachment head production equipment had been retooled for other purposes. The engineering team that had designed the system had dispersed years before AGCO arrived. The last UniSystem power unit left the Coldwater shipping dock in approximately 1983. The union filed its final grievance on the UniSystem line that year. The second-generation drawing stayed in the filing cabinet. A Swedish equipment conglomerate read similar drawings later, in a different language, under a different patent. Allied Products filed Chapter 11 in 1986. 200 dealers closed that year. The Coldwater plant kept running, smaller. The engineers were gone. The attachment drawings were filed. AGCO bought what remained in 1991. The name survived. The UniSystem did not.